When I think of home, I get a warm, fuzzy feeling inside. I can almost smell my mom's incense, the cardamom, the hot teapot on the stove. I can remember playing outside with my friends, our feet covered in the red soil. When I think of these images, it fills me with so much joy. And when I close my eyes, I am home. I'm sure all of you can recognize that feeling. Today, I wanted to tell you a little bit about my home. My country is the only country in Africa that has never been colonized. We are the keepers of the Ark of the Covenant, and we're the only country in the world that produces teff. It's an input to our indigenous food. This is how I see my home, Ethiopia, but this is not how everybody sees it. They see it in famine, they see it in poverty, and they often see it through UN advertisements. Who here has ever seen a UN ad? For those of you who haven't, it's often a close-up on a child's face who's starving. And in the background, you have a community that's been devastated by a climate event. And on the child's face, there's always, and I heard somebody say it, there's always a fly. And I hate that fly. It has followed me since I was a child, every time my country's been represented. And on the playground outside of Ethiopia, whenever I went to play, the kids had already seen my country. They'd seen the images, and they'd seen the fly. They looked at me with pity. Over and over, on the playground, they touched their faces, showing me the fly, so I would never forget. That fly had turned into a symbol of neglect, of fragility, and it was something I didn't want anything to do with. So fast forward a few years, and I moved to Nairobi, Kenya. A friend of mine asked me to come and visit her farm. She had a new innovation she wanted to show me, and I obliged. I went to that farm. When I walked into her greenhouse, the first thing that hit me was an overwhelming sense or smell of putrid, rotten fruits and vegetables. Next was an overwhelming heat, thick and all-consuming. But worst of all, and I'm embarrassed to say that it was the last thing I noticed, worst of all were the hundreds and thousands of flies, hovering, buzzing, crawling all over. I looked at my hands and feet and they were covered in flies. I couldn't understand why anyone would do this, let alone my friend. What was she doing here? This was my worst nightmare. Outside, after I dusted off the flies, she started explaining to me. She was putting the flies to work. She was collecting organic waste from the surrounding areas and feeding it to these flies. And what came out the other end was not poverty, was not rot, and it was not disease. It was high-protein animal feed and organic fertilizer, ready for the market. And I was astonished. Those tiny flies, they were doing a massive job. They're black soldier flies, she told me. And they can turn what we throw away as trash into something of value. I had always seen the flies as something of value, but in that instant, they were not. I was looking at a solution. I was looking at technology, labor, and infrastructure. And my mind immediately went home. I started thinking of Ethiopia, a country that struggles to feed itself. We have a protein scarcity. We have an abundance of organic waste, but we keep searching for imported, massive solutions and ignoring the ones that are buzzing right in front of us. But in Ethiopia, we are sitting at the intersection of fragility and resilience. We go through cycles of climate events such as El Nino and drought. And even though we have a long agricultural history and an abundance of rural labor, food insecurity has become systematic and not episodic. Millions of families are oscillating between subsistence and scarcity. But that's not the only issue. We also have a protein scarcity. And when protein is scarce, it leads to stunting, to malnutrition, and it leads to a loss of productivity for an entire generation. When protein is scarce, development slows, quietly but persistently. But this is not the only issue. In Ethiopia, 80% of organic waste ends up in landfill. That's about 8 million tons. And that waste doesn't just disappear, it turns into methane. So Ethiopia faces a dual burden: food insecurity and an abundance of organic waste. Often these two problems are seen as completely opposing, but I do not believe that they are. So I decided to build my own greenhouse with my own flies, and I collected organic waste from local markets and fed it to the flies. We produced high-protein animal feed and organic waste ready for the market. But here's where the story gets a bit upsetting. The government shut us down. They didn't want flies in their food system. I was heartbroken, but I understood. At first glance, flies look like contamination. They look like backwardness, the opposite of progress. And in Ethiopia, things that don't look right, they struggle to take root. And black soldier flies, they're unfamiliar, they look nothing like modern agriculture, and they invoke an instinctive rejection inside us, the same one that I had when I entered my friend's greenhouse all those years ago. But I don't believe that the resistance to the flies is just about that. It's about what looks developed, what feels advanced. And for me, the flies that I grew up hating, they never changed, but my perspective of them did. And maybe that's the real lesson here, that our perspectives need to change. Because not only do quick judgments shrink insects, but they also shrink entire countries. And Ethiopia has been seen as a country full of famine or in poverty. But so too have other countries been reduced to their worst moments. We flatten them and we write them off. But if we can look at a fly and turn it from a nuisance into infrastructure, from neglect to nourishment, then so too can we give Ethiopia that same reconsideration. If I can look at a fly today and see value and see labor, then I can look at Ethiopia and see innovation. I can see hope. And I can see a country that in the not too distant future can feed itself. There's more than one way to look at a fly. There's more than one way to look at Ethiopia. And there's more than one way to look at poverty itself. And when we're able to change our perspective, we're able to change what becomes possible. And I look forward to welcoming you all to my black soldier fly farm in the near future. Thank you very much.